everyone here, and we're lucky that we have it up and running. So thank you all. We are excited to be here with you this evening to talk about the Sunnyside Conservation Overlay that started, the concept started with my predecessor, Councilman Espinosa, when I was working in his council office. So it feels good to be here. Through all the pandemic, we decided that we wanted to continue working, and so we figured out new ways to pivot. Just like everybody else in life had to pivot, so did we continue with this work. We've pivoted. So Naomi Grenditz, who's in my office, what I did with my staffing was I hired an in-house land use planner. And then I have Gina Volpe, who is my office manager and helps keep us on time and does all the back stuff, is here with us as well. And we're here to listen and have a very respectful conversation. This is the listening portion of the overlay. We're not wanting to say who's right, who's wrong. We just want to listen to you all on the work that we've brought forward. So with that, Naomi, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And I would like to introduce representatives from the Sunnyside United Neighbors. We've got Bill Hare and Trupti. They want to introduce themselves and make a statement. Right, it's very formal.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. First of all, welcome and thank you for joining us. And also a special welcome to those that have been on what we've called the working group for the last almost 18 months now. Catherine Caldwell, Kevin Anderson, Rod Kaczynski, of course, Trupti and James, and of course, Amanda's sponsorship. But most importantly, Naomi's put a huge amount of work into this, and I really want to thank her for that. And then two quick additional comments. We've seen over 180 surveys returned already, which is fantastic. And one of the continuing concerns that we see is that we're trying to regulate style. And along with Catherine, we're really the two people that have been involved with this from a Sunny perspective from the very beginning, almost 4 years ago. And I can tell you that that was never our intent, and it hasn't been the intent of the working group. We have been concerned about proportion. And I think when we've used the word character, sometimes people think of that in a purely surface aesthetic perspective. And what we're really talking about is proportionality. We want things to be in proportion with what exists. It's a difficult balance, and that's why we need everybody's input, and that's why we're here tonight, and why we'll have the other two town halls, and that's how important the survey is. But I do want people to understand that we're not trying to regulate style. In fact, what we're talking about doing is we're going to put some examples of more modern designs that would fit in the overlay on the landing page so that you can check back on the landing page, see those designs, and hopefully get more comfortable with the fact that we're not regulating style. And the last quick comment is, please consider this as individual elements, not as one lump sum of an overlay, but consider each element, give us your feedback on different elements. We don't necessarily have to end up with all 8 elements. We want the elements that the community truly wants. Thanks, Naomi.
Thanks so much, Bill. Trupti, were you going to, I don't want to put you on the spot, but were you going to say anything?
No, you know what? I think Bill covered it. I mean, welcome and thank you, especially this is really important to us. It's kind of 4 or 5 years in the making. And really, it's not moving forward until the community wants it to move forward. And I think that's an important aspect of this, which is we've got a proposal here. It's changed a little bit from the original proposal, but 80% of what the intent was of the original proposal, I believe, is still captured here, even though we simplified it a bit. But all of this moves forward with your approval and your input. So this is what we're doing. And if I could ask anything, it would be, please tell your neighbors and to get involved and to show up, at the next couple of meetings, which are going to be live. The next one is Saturday morning at bookbinding from 10 to 11:30. We've got a morning session, and the one after that is actually 8:12. I can't remember if it's a Thursday or not. Somebody correct me if that's Thursday, August 12th. Then it's an evening session. So we try to cover as much as possible with evening, virtual, live, weekend, weekday. And on top of that, we've got events coming up next Thursday at Factotum, and there'll be representatives. We'll be there, other folks will be there. We'll be there to answer questions about this, as well as Sunnyside Music Festival. So there will be a lot of opportunities for us, for you really, to ask questions about this and to provide feedback. So that's really the only thing I've got to say here. And I'd like to thank Catherine Cornwell, who was the original author, who really got us started on this path of thinking about preserving and conserving the neighborhood and the neighborhood character, and thinking about what we all want it to look like going forward in light of all the development that's happening. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Trupti. All right, I'm gonna get going with sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. Here's the agenda for today. We've just done intros. I'm gonna give a presentation right now that's gonna walk through some zoning and building principles in Denver, some stats about Sunnyside, and then what's actually the different elements that are being proposed. And hopefully we're gonna leave most of the time left for questions and answers. We've got myself, the councilwoman, Sunny representatives. I'd also like to welcome from the planning department. We've got Brad Johnson, who's been very helpful with feedback for us. He's here to answer things from a city perspective. So really most of the time, as the councilman and Bill and Trupti were saying, is for listening for questions and answers. We're hoping to wrap up at 8 and be respectful of your time. We are leaving a little bit of time at the end for just a shout out to another project that's very important and going on in the neighborhood called the Neighborhood Planning Initiative. So we'll probably stop Q&A around 7:50 or 7:55 just to give Liz from the planning department some time to talk about that. So without further ado, some meeting reminders. Please stay muted when not speaking. We have this set up as a meeting, not a webinar. That means that you can turn your camera on. We can all see each other's faces. We can unmute. I think it's much more interactive and less us talking at you and you have no control type of webinar thing. But given that, please stay muted. When you do share comments and feedback, please be concise and leave space for everyone to be heard and make their comments. Please do keep in mind that everyone is here because they love and care about Sunnyside, whatever perspective they're coming from. So please be respectful of different opinions. And lastly, if you have questions during the presentation or at any time, feel free to put them in the chat. We have James monitoring that. We've also got Councilman Sandoval monitoring it on Facebook. So sometimes they could answer a question just in the chat, or we can queue it up and do it for Q&A later. But generally for Q&A, we'll just have people chime in with questions, then you can do it live. But again, if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, you can do it in the chat. All right. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about zoning and development in Sunnyside, then how this overlay came to this place it is now and what's in it, and then a little bit about next steps and process. And then we'll get to Q&A. So some stats about Sunnyside. This is the neighborhood. It's got about 3,819 total properties in it. This overlay and this discussion today is really about the areas that are zoned to allow single unit and 2-unit, also called duplex zoning. And so in total, that's 3,259 properties. That's obviously the majority of the neighborhood is either zoned for single unit or 2-unit. And between 2-unit and single unit, you can see the breakdown over here, a little bit over half for single unit and around 42% for 2-unit. So what do buildings in Sunnyside look like? And when were they built? So this is super interesting. I'm a nerd, I love graphs and charts. So there's a range of building ages in Sunnyside. The average age, or the median age actually, is built in 1926. But you can see these distinct kind of building phases where between 1900 and 1910, there were tons of new buildings happening. And then again, between 1920 and 1930, and again in kind of the post-war era, 1940 to 50. And then it drops off quite a bit until we get to the last decade, which is this other very noticeable increase in building trends again. In terms of what it looks like on the ground, here's just a sample of houses throughout Sunnyside. They're from a variety of ages, a variety of styles. This is crazy, but the average size of the house, and this is above ground, not including basements, but the average size of the house in Sunnyside is only 1,104 square feet. There's obviously outliers, bigger and smaller, but they're relatively small, modest homes. And that plays out in height as well. 57% are only one story. And 29% more are a story and a half. Half story kind of meaning there's just a little bit of space on a second floor, not really a full second floor. So the vast majority of homes are pretty small, the small scale. And then there are, of course, some two-story and taller, larger homes throughout the neighborhood. So this conversation is about new construction, where it's happening, what it's looking like, how it fits in with previous construction. So I thought this map was pretty interesting. This is the age of construction, again, just in the single unit and 2-unit zones. You can see that in the darkest blue is the most recent from 2010 to currently. And it's really concentrated into this side of the neighborhood that has the duplex zoning. In fact, 85% of new construction that's happened in the past year has been in the 2-unit zones. And here's again that map, so you can see how that kind of tracks with where the zoning was. So I do want to point out a couple of things. One, this overlay is not about changing the underlying zoning, and it does not change the underlying zoning. For example, where duplexes can be built, where single unit houses can be built. I also want to point out that within the single unit area, there's some diversity there in zoning that allows ADUs. So there's these zone districts that have a 1 at the end, C1 and B1 allow accessory dwelling units. So there are some areas in here where people have been building accessory dwelling units, and they sort of, have multiple units on those as well. Sorry. So since we're going to be talking about the building and zoning codes, I wanted to first show you an extremely complex and unreadable page, which is from the zoning code. So Denver has a form-based code. It really has kind of a hybrid code, but when we say form-based code, it means that our regulations about building are more involving the spaces and volumes that certain types of buildings can take up in different places versus specifying what goes in them. So in our 2-unit and single unit districts that we're talking about today, you've got these 2 building forms that you can choose from. There's actually another one, but these are called a tandem house, but the duplex form is usually the most common used in the areas that allow duplexes. And the urban house form is really the kind of house box that you can build a house in, actually in both districts. So I just wanted to show you what the pages look like. I'm going to break it down, hopefully in a much more understandable way. So here is what we call sort of this imaginary invisible glass box that constrains what you can build on your property. It's called the bulk plane. This version of the bulk plane here actually applies to both that duplex form and the urban house form that I just was talking about. So that makes it easier. We'll walk through what it looks like. So essentially a house has to fit inside it. This house model I chose is a kind of a larger, almost 4 square-ish looking house. It's like 3,000 something square feet. It's actually pretty big. And you can see how it fits inside the bulk plane. There's a few things that can stick out. You're allowed to have little bits of eaves, chimneys, porches, other things can stick out of the bulk plane a little bit, and that's specified in the code. But really what's important is these numbers here. So the bulk plane, the buildable area, this glass box cuts off at 30 feet. That does go up a little bit on wider lots. You're allowed to have a little bit more height for the widest lots. But in general, the average kind of property size that we're talking about in Sunnyside in both single unit and 2-unit areas are 50 feet wide and 125 feet deep. So we modeled a lot on that. That would be a height cap hard cap of 30 feet. It's also a cap of 2.5 stories. And as I was mentioning before, a half story is kind of a strange concept, but this is what it is in the zoning code. It's basically a story that is smaller than the story below it by a certain percentage. In Denver, 75%. So this story is 75% or smaller than the story below it. And the area we're counting is where that story is at least 6 feet in height from the bottom, from the floor to the top of the roof, actually. So that's what a half story is. So another important part of this invisible glass box is the bulk plane itself, which is this 45-degree angle that goes in at the property line. And so currently it starts 17 feet and goes in and kind of shears off the sides, as you can see there. There's also setbacks, meaning you can't build right next to your neighbor's property. These numbers do change a little bit, actually based on the width of your property. If you have smaller properties, they get less restrictive. But again, we're talking about kind of an average 50-foot wide lot. You have a setback of 5. I'm sorry, this chart is actually wrong. The image is correct. It's a 5-foot setback on both sides from your neighbor's property. And there's a front setback from the sidewalk of 20 feet. The other element that constrains what and how much you can build on your property is a lot coverage maximum. It's 37.5% of your total property. It sounds kind of low, but actually most people don't end up running into maxing out that. And things like garages and extra buildings also count towards that, but you can kind of discount half of the square footage of your garage, and there's these workarounds. But in total, this is this, again, invisible glass box that constrains what you can or cannot build. So here's what we've been hearing from neighbors and community members as they're seeing new development come in. And I really want to point out that it's not all new buildings, and it's not in particular style, though maybe some styles give themselves more to this. But what some people have been finding has been jarring with new construction is how it fills out this glass box. So this comparison, you can see how some of the older buildings fit into that buildable envelope of the glass box. And again, most buildings in Sunnyside are these smaller existing houses on the right, versus in the middle, what could be built. Now I know this is the absolute, what we call maxing out the bulk plane, maxing out the buildable area. And you can see how different that is in multiple aspects from what is currently there in terms of how it's sited, how wide it is, its relationship to the street. And I also do want to point out here that it's not so much about how much space is inside the building, but how it's expressed. And that's what we talk about when we're talking about massing. So for instance, the large home on the left, the one that I showed in the first bulk plane example, I said is around 3,092 square feet above ground. The model that I made on SketchUp in the middle is actually the exact same size. It is also 3,000 square feet. So there's the same floor area in both of the middle building and the far left building, but they're expressed in a very different way. And that's what this overlay is trying to get at. So what is an overlay? What is a conservation overlay particularly? It's an extra set of design standards that go on top of the existing zoning. So a conservation overlay specifically is a tool in the zoning code that is meant to preserve, revitalize or conserve specific areas with distinctive features, identity, or character worthy of retention or enhancement. You can add, modify, remove any of the rules that are in the zone district, but there can only be one on one area. And we can't change the uses that go in, like for instance, allowing a commercial use in an area that's really zoned to just be residential. A conservation overlay as a tool does not allow you to do that. So if this were to move forward and eventually be adopted, it would be the 7th conservation overlay that exists in Denver. There are 6 others before it. And I want to point out that there's a lot of variety and diversity in what these conservation overlays do. Some of them are much more restrictive. Some of them are much more general. So for instance, the Cressana Park overlay, number 5, is very targeted at this mid-century modern style. And really constrains development to that there, versus the Potter Highlands overlay, which is in our neighboring Highlands neighborhood, is much more general. It's, I think, more along the lines of what this overlay, Sunnyside, would be trying to do. So, overlay history, it's been going on for a long time. I wrote here, community discussions started in 2018, but I'm sure they were happening much longer before that. This was happening with Sunnyside and with former Councilman Rafael Espinoza. There were community meetings and initial proposal developed back in spring 2018 by Catherine Cornwell, as Trupti mentioned. And since then, transitioning to Councilman Sandoval, we've been convening this working group over the past year and a half to simplify and streamline the proposals and really get it ready to come to the community for your feedback. I wanted to talk a little bit about who we are. We are people, we are individuals, Sunnyside residents, and from the planning department and from the council office. There's myself, Bill, Trupti. We've got James. We've had Catherine, who's an urban planner and a resident, and is actually building a house using overlay principles from many of them from the original overlay proposal. We've also had two architects, Kevin and Rod, who've been part of the process. And we've had Brad Johnson from the planning department to bounce ideas off of, as well as many other people who've helped inform these ideas. Overall, we've tried to keep some objectives in mind. The idea is to ensure that new development is compatible in scale and massing with existing context, but at the same time to not constrain design and style specifically, to maintain some of that flexibility. And also in thinking about what is the character of Sunnyside, to keep things simple and reflective of the higher level patterns that are in common. So not saying this is a Tudor, this is a 50s bungalow, but what do they have in common? What about their shapes and placements and attributes that people enjoy do they have in common and that we want to see go forward with new construction? So here we are with the proposal, hopefully ready for some community feedback. All right, getting into the meat of it now. So hopefully, if you've all completed the survey, I will also be putting the link to that in the into the chat here, so you can do it. The survey will walk you through this exact thing that I'm going to show you now. These, I think, 7 elements. So the first proposal is to reduce the bulk plane. You can see the old bulk plane there, and again, the bulk plane is that 45-degree angle. So reducing it from 17 feet down to 14 feet. What this would really do is it would help constrain the massing of new buildings on the upper stories, not the lower stories, but the upper stories. And that would keep it more in line with the existing buildings that are in the neighborhood. The second proposal is to have a separate height limit for low slope, which is the technical zoning code term for flat roofs. And actually it's a low slope roof is anything below 412 pitch, the little graphic I have there. So the idea would be to cap low slope roofs at 22 feet. Pitched roofs could go up to the height they can now. The number 22 came from research and measurements of historic flat roofed buildings throughout Denver, but very specifically in Sunnyside and the surrounds. And also vetted it against some new construction that is flat roofs, 2-story flat roof construction that has happened. So it is a feasible number for a 2-story flat roof building. Proposal 3, this works with lowering that bulk plane, because we understand when you lower the bulk plane, you are constraining development a bit, but there's ways to still get more buildable space out of that if you allow dormers, which are traditional architectural elements that allow more living space, but also aren't as impactful on the mass, the appearance of mass of a building. So this would come directly from precedent in other overlays. It's really easy to apply and would allow dormers to pierce through that glass box, as you can see in the image here. Proposal 4 is to require porches. The vast majority of homes in Sunnyside have some sort of porch. Many of them have very large porches, but porches are kind of a beloved aspect of homes in the neighborhood. They do a couple of things. One, they help step back the bulk of a building. So instead of just one large flat wall of an entrance, there's actually this kind of smaller mass in front and a larger in back. It sort of tricks your eye to think that the building itself is not as large. And it provides a transition between the public and private realm. So the proposal is to have a depth of 6 feet as a minimum. And we have been asking people in the overlay survey what the width should be. Here's some examples. So far, 12 feet is winning, but we shall see how that goes forward. And the porch, the only requirements would be that it would be covered. It would be a covered porch, and it couldn't be recessed underneath a story, for instance. Like, it can't be set into it. That wouldn't count. To point out, these are just minimums. You can build as big of a porch as you want. You can have parts of it recessed. There would just be a requirement that some part of that porch would stick out 6 feet and be 12 feet wide, if that were to go forward. Moving on to number 5. This is a proposed cap on overall square footage. This is an interesting idea. This actually came out of conversations with some other overlays. And it's about, what homes now look like versus new homes. And again, to point out that the average current house size in Sunnyside is just over 1,000 square feet. That's not how people live today. That's not how people necessarily want to live today. It doesn't work for large households. That would be a very small cap. So the number 3,000 came out of looking at some of what are sort of the largest existing homes, unit sizes, whether it's single family or a duplex unit itself. What are the largest ones? And you can see with this 30 largest homes built in Sunnyside, that they generally kind of cap around 3,000. It's kind of the upper limit. I will point out that 20 of the 30 of these largest homes in Sunnyside were built in the last 10 years. Homes are trending larger, and some of these are actually duplex units. So it's not just standalone single family homes or single units. It's duplex sizes as well. There's one extremely large house that's 5,305 square feet, single unit. And we're seeing some of those being built in Sloan's Lake. There's actually a large trend of extremely large homes being built there. So this proposal, again, is just to think about potentially keeping, if not the actual, again, we don't want to cap it to 1,000 square feet as the average size is for old homes. That would be ridiculous. But in the spirit of, more modestly sized homes that Sunnyside currently has. So there's a question of whether this I know we weren't specific, and again, we're here to think things out and talk about it, and I'm sure people will point out stuff we missed, and that's what this is for. So this is great. But would this apply to like a dwelling unit, or are we talking about the actual like building itself? I'm sorry, we were not specific about that. So getting towards the end, proposal 6 is setting a minimum max building base height. Having a base is an extremely common aspect of most construction, except for kind of the more modern, when you start to get into the 50s and 60s. There are certainly exceptions in Sunnyside, but again, the bulk of homes have some sort of raised elevation. So this proposal has gotten a lot of concern. I'll just call it out already that people are definitely concerned about if this would impact accessibility, universal design. Can you, what about if you're mobility impaired? So that's something that we're very aware of and want to have a conversation about. This standard was included in a previous overlay, and that was a huge topic of discussion, both with the community and at planning board and at council. And there are a lot of workarounds and exceptions that are built into if this were to move forward that help accommodate for anyone that has any sort of mobility access needs. I wrote some of them down here. The ramps are allowed in the setback. Again, a foot elevation would be a minimum. It could be waived completely through the Board of Adjustments, but I do want to call out that there's some question from people about how this would impact people with mobility access issues. All right, well, last one. So now this is a materials requirement question. So people do love brick, and it keeps getting talked about. So we really wanted to just put this out there and discuss it. 67% of current houses use brick as the primary building or wall material. This is data from the city assessor. It's a long-lasting material. I think people have a general sense of loss when a nice sturdy brick building gets torn down and potentially replaced with something that is not a long-lasting, as well-built building. Brick also has attributes of helping kind of break down the appearance of mass. It's like the smaller unit. So putting that out there, we have the poll open, which I will go now to the summary, since that was all the proposals. So survey results so far, we have now like almost 200, but when I pulled it yesterday, we had 185. I put stars next to the ones that had the highest amount of support so far. And down here in proposal 7 with brick, actually we're at 36% saying we shouldn't require brick. That was one of the options. The runner up to that is brick should be required to some degree when replacing a brick building. The other options were, I think there was other, and then also brick should always be required. So this one is an interesting conversation to have. All right, I have a couple of last things. Top concerns and questions. So these are the things that we're starting to hear from people, both in terms of positive feedback and negative feedback. There are people who want the proposed elements to be even more restrictive. We want a lower bulk plane or outright prohibit flat roofs. So that's on one side. And then there's also a lot of people who don't see an issue with newer construction in terms of massing. So those are both two valid perspectives. In general, what we've been hearing in terms of concerns that we can address during Q&A is how any of these proposals individually or collectively would impact housing or construction costs, would impact the ability to pop the top of existing buildings, or would generally, how small will this make buildings? Like, are we really shrinking things down to the point where it's not going to work for people? And then, of course, concerns about restricting density or affordability or discouraging duplexes while we're in the midst of needing more housing for people. So my next couple of slides hopefully can answer some of these questions, and then we can dive more into Q&A based on what you all want to talk about. But I wanted to show with modeling how much this reduced bulk plane specifically, and some of the other elements how much of a difference would this make in what you can build? And I use this duplex example because that seems to be what people are most interested in. So this is the current bulk plane and a current duplex with the bare minimum requirements. So you are required to have entrances facing the street, and the current code requires a flat roof above 25 feet to be stepped back 10 feet. But that's what it looks like. And here's little, geometric people down there hanging out for perspective. This is what the overlay would do in terms of the new bulk plane. You can see how it shears off some of that buildable area. This is just one example again. This is what could be built for a flat roofed structure under the proposal. So I put the porches on there because they would be required. The narrower or lower bulk plane, it sort of incentivizes a narrower building module. We call it the width of the building because it's most effective to build a wall straight up. And if you want to do that up to 22 feet, that means you're going to set it in a little bit more. So you're going to get ideally a little narrower building, which is again more in line with what the existing buildings in Sunnyside. If you're interested, the first floor of this model here is 11 feet and the second floor is 10 feet. Also, if someone were to build this, again, this is just one example, these two units are both 1,900 square feet per unit. And to compare that to stuff that has been built recently, there have been 32 duplex units built in the last 10 years that were around or under this, or under 1,900 square feet. So not unreasonable. And again, that's just flat roof. So if you would like to actually put a pitched roof on there and go up to 30 feet and get some livable space under here, you get up to 2,142 square feet per unit. And if you want to take advantage of dormers, that adds up to a total of 2,295 square feet per unit. And that honestly, the average duplex size that's been built in the last 10 years is smaller than that. It's 2,287 square feet. So this all would be possible under the overlay. And this is just one very ugly non-architect example of massing and something that could be built. So process, STAR is where we're at. Working group, we worked through it. We're here to talk to you and hear your ideas and feedback. We're doing these surveys and town halls and flyering. We will do more until we get a lot of feedback from people. If you have ideas for how to reach people, let us know. Based on this, we'll refine the proposal. As Bill was saying, there may be things that are modified and taken out. For example, in the Harkness Heights overlay, in the survey of the community, found out that one of our proposals for a porch restriction was not popular, and so took it out. People didn't want it, and that made sense. So we worked with the planning department on doing that, and then eventually creating a technical draft, and also modeling and testing and doing a lot more looking into any unintended consequences. So if there is support, eventually we would submit the application. There would be a public review, draft, and comment period. And then there is a legislative process that kicks in even after that, that involves more property owner notifications, signs, public hearings, and things like that. So hopefully that's to show you kind of where we are in the process and how feedback would be incorporated. And I've talked way too long now. So I want to make sure that we can jump into our Q&A. I believe I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so we can just all see each other's faces and chat, but I'm also happy to bring up slides again if we want to reference them. And let's see if we've got some first questions. Do we not have a raise hand function? That's a bummer. Let's see.
I believe we do, Naomi. If you bring up participants, you should be able to, you see a button for raise hand.
Oh, I thought if you went to reactions, you saw raise
Yeah, I
hand.
thought it was reactions. Yep,
Yeah,
raise hand. Under reactions.
Oh, perfect.
I just raised my hand.
Great, thank you.
Naomi, does it make sense for James to summarize what's been in the chat so far? Maybe they'll get people warmed up with questions.
Yeah, James, do you want to be our master of ceremonies?
Sure. So most of the questions were kind of one-offs that were answered. So there was a question as to whether or not Potter Highlands overlay had an above ground square footage cap.
Oh, that was answered too, which is no.
Yes, that is correct. It does not. Yeah, the Harkness Heights overlay was the first one to talk about a square footage cap.
So
basement is not considered towards it. It's just an above ground square footage. So
and I think that's an important piece, because as you were talking about some of the sizes that you were showing, and I think they were above 2,000 square feet, the basement is actually not included, which means you could have another, probably close to 1,000 square feet underneath, as far as total overall, and people thinking about how they live and how much space they need for their families and how they want to live today. So basement square footage is not included in the cap. And in some of the numbers that you were showing, they were all above ground, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
So I had asked a question when I was talking to some folks in the community while flyering and hanging up some signs. A lot of people were wondering whether or not this was an attempt to make Sunnyside a historic district designation. Could you talk a little bit, either maybe Catherine yourself, since you're a resident expert on this, as to the difference between an overlay and a resident or historic district designation?
Yeah, I'm Catherine. You're welcome to chime in. I can start if anyone wants, or actually, Brad, if I could put you on the spot, we could talk a little bit about from the planning side what that looks like. One of the big differences with hello, Brad. Do you mind if you want to take this one?
And if not,
Yeah, I can start, and if I miss something, I was you guys can jump in.
Brad, we have that PDF that CPD made. I can put that in the chat where it talks about the purpose and it talks about process, and it's literally a chart. So I can put that in the chat because I always go to that too.
Awesome.
That's great for kind of future reference, but it'd be great, Brad, if you kind of gave us the highlights, the 10,000 square foot, 10,000 feet view of the differences.
Sure. And you guys jump in if I miss something here, but as a historic district, the big difference is for one, that addresses demolition. So it is about, that's a big component of a historic district. Would do things to try to curtail demolition of existing homes that were contributing structures and so on. A conservation overlay would not have the power to do something like that. Further, a historic district gets into review of kind of alterations, what we might consider an alteration, like a change of a window, for example, in a historic district on a contributing structure. You might have to get that approved. And then another big component is that, at least in Denver and most places around the country, in historic districts, you have to go through a discretionary design review process where someone's reviewing it based on qualitative guidelines, whatever your project is. Whereas a conservation overlay in Denver, anyway, is a zoning tool. And so the rules are prescriptive, very clear. You either meet it or you don't. Whereas in a historic district, that design review is a little bit more discretionary. It's a little bit more squishy, if I can use that term.
Thank you, Brad. And I think I don't know if Bill or someone who's been involved in this way longer than I have wants to speak up about it, but I think that there wasn't a desire to do a historic district. They're amazing tools. They're very prescriptive. They do add a lot of costs. There's a lot of complexity involved, and I think that that was something this was basically the conservation overlay was an idea of like, well, how can we get to some of the things that we want to preserve, that are patterns, large scale patterns in the neighborhood, like porches and kind of smaller massing, without doing something that's as preserving in amber as a historic district is.
Or to be,
I think you covered it, Naomi. I think it's come up several times over the last several years, and everybody's always felt that it was going to be too prescriptive. And thanks to Catherine's guidance and leadership early on, she knew what could be done with an overlay. And I think everybody that was involved, or certainly most people that were involved, felt that was adequate.
Catherine, would you like to add anything? Because I think you may have thought about this much more and much more in depth than a lot of folks in terms of why you didn't go towards a historic. And I think we could have, because of our streetcar patterns, that was an option, but you chose not to. So if you can share a little bit about your thinking on why not that, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, I think that it's a conservation district is really like a historic district light, basically. It still has to be based on prevailing architectural patterns, but it doesn't get to the level of detail of a historic district. So like a historic district, someone had mentioned windows. It can get very prescriptive about whether or not you have double hung window panes, or very, very much about the style of development and reflecting those historic architectural patterns. A conservation overlay is going to be more about mass and form, and like Bill was saying at the beginning, proportion or like roof forms, you know, bigger pieces where you still see the historic form, but the style could be very, very different. So, I mean, the best example I can point you to is what we've done on my block. I have a really historic home, and I've redone the details on the home to be very consistent with the time period of the home. And then next door to us, we've built a house that reflects the prevailing form of the historic architecture, but it's a very modern expression of that form. And so I think we're in Sunnyside, we've always been pretty accepting of a variety of architectural patterns, and that's part of our charm as a neighborhood, that we're kind of eclectic, and we're not just a very solid historic district. And I do think that's really appropriate. We've been a neighborhood that's been traditionally known for workforce housing, and that's clear in our, you know, smaller structures and that sort of thing, unlike, you know, a Capitol Hill where you might have more grand structures that are worth preserving, that have been broken up into multiple units or something like that. I think there's certainly a case to be made that, you know, perhaps the architecture, while charming and delightful in Sunnyside, doesn't necessarily rise to being examples of very extraordinary representations of architecture of a certain period. I think we've got wonderful, charming, lovely structures, but probably not many examples that you would say are the preeminent design of the time. So the conservation overlay seemed more appropriate for us, because we're really trying to keep a little more visual harmony between new and old than what we've been seeing in recent years, but without restricting that so much that it's very prescriptive and like you can only build a traditional style. We don't necessarily want to do that. We want to keep more options on the table for people. And I would just invite everyone to come check out what we've done. We're on Beach Court between 44th and 45th. And I'm on the southwest corner of 45th and Beach, and the house that we built is next door to me. So feel free to swing by and check it out and tell us what you think.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was very eloquently put. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Spot on. Oh, I just saw another question pop into the chat. And all right, this is interesting. So since the overlay would not alter the underlying zoning, would the proposed porch size, minimum porch size, be required to sit behind the minimum primary street setback? So actually, porches can protrude into that primary setback to a degree. Brad, I might pick this over to you again. Or actually, Catherine, did you want to chime in on that one?
But I would just say, I think my understanding was that we could have the porches protrude into that front setback, and that my understanding all the way along is that there was a desire to see that. So if that helps, and Brad, of course, could weigh in and say that specifically from the city side, I just want to speak up about what we heard in the meetings early on.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that projecting front porch, there's probably some specific design criteria, a few that it has to meet, but I think an unenclosed porch, I think it's called now in the recently updated zoning code, can go in 8 feet into that front setback, required setback area.
Yep.
Wouldn't have to, but can.
Is that, Brad, is that only a raised front porch that can protrude 8 feet? Or if
No.
it's ground level,
No,
such as
no.
if it was just flagstone, can it protrude further?
As long as it meets that design criterion, I'd have to look it up to tell you specifically what that is, but it definitely doesn't have to be raised.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. The definition of porch in the zoning code as it is pretty broad. So there's a lot of things that would qualify. Another question from Angela, thank you for these questions. Would adoption of the proposed minimum base height also increase the maximum vertical heights accordingly? No, the base height would exist, and the height caps would exist as well. So I think that if you did the minimum again with if you did a pitched roof and did this 30-foot cap that exists as of today, you had a base height of the minimum of 1 foot, then you could do what 11 feet above that, and then another 10 feet, and then 8 feet. Is that right? Is math right? I think you could still get, ceilings of a reasonable height. I know that if there's more modern market demand for higher ceilings, but maybe not a 13-foot ceiling, unless you could design things in interesting ways and have kind of an open like atrium area and get really tall ceilings that way. But yes, the height wouldn't raise with the base. Do you have any follow-ups, Angela?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think that I've got a lot of questions and thoughts. I've read through the zoning code. Full disclosure, so I own a very small, very old house, smaller than the median, older than the median house on the east side of the neighborhood, where it's zoned for 2 units. And I think my concerns are mostly around that restricting of new building and how this overlay might discourage building duplexes. If for like this question about increasing the base and then not increasing the maximum height accordingly might discourage 2-story duplexes. And so I think that there's some further thought there. The duplexes that you showed that would fit according to the new form, I think we're effectively going to, with this overlay or that proposal on reducing the maximum roof height on flat roofs to 22 feet, you're effectively going to also eliminate 3rd-story rooftops, correct? Like that's completely gone.
No, actually, you can have rooftops. That was something we discussed early on. There was maybe at one point an idea of restricting rooftops, but people love their rooftops. So yeah, there would be
the slides, maybe.
No.
Could we bring up the slides, especially what he's referring to, and
no, he's just referring to the fact that I think a lot of times that half story we talk about with a flat roof is often an access point to a rooftop deck. There's rare instances I've seen where it really is kind of livable space. And so I think the question is about prohibiting rooftop decks. I do know that there is a provision already in the zoning code about like how, for instance, stair access to rooftops are allowed to go above minimum heights, and that already exists in the zoning code. So I think as our intent is not in any way to eliminate rooftop decks, then
Yes.
it could be
Hi.
around. Yeah, sorry, Catherine. I couldn't tell if your hand was up from before.
No, I re-raised it.
I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to chime in a little bit because I do think this point is one that we need to clear up a little bit, because my understanding is that we did prevent the rooftop decks. And I think if we're going to back off of that, we need to have a conversation about what's appropriate, because it's really what we heard repeatedly from people is concern about the loss of privacy in backyards. And I think there's a way for us to get we're trying to get hipped or gabled roofs over that half story if the half story is above the second floor. So that's why the bulk claim really encourages manipulation of that roof form with dormers and everything, so that any loss of square footage that you might get in that half story above the second floor, you can make up for it with the dormers and articulation of the roof, which is a pattern that is very much consistent with the prevailing pattern in the neighborhood. And one of the ways that you would get to a rooftop access would be those sort of funny looking towers that protrude on the roof. And that's just not a pattern that we see in the neighborhood. And if instead you have a hipped or gabled roof covering something like that for the extent of that roof, you could put a balcony or some sort of enclosed rooftop space on that what's essentially the third floor, but maybe we do it in the front, but not the back. And so I think this is something we still need to talk about, because I don't know when that piece was taken out during the working group process. It's not my understanding that we took that out.
Okay, well, maybe we do need to work through that a little bit more.
Okay.
That was not my understanding. It's not in the presentation we've given anybody. So TBD.
Hey, I've got my hand up. So if nobody else does, I don't know. I'm sorry. Somebody's paying attention.
Oh, there's a couple, there's some more questions in the chat, but if you don't mind if I jump in with the question from Matthew.
Oh, please do.
Would there be any consideration for addressing building energy use on new construction? So I think that's a super fascinating question. And it is probably a question for outside of the zoning code. It's more a question for building codes. Denver is doing some interesting stuff with the building codes in terms of generally focusing on kind of more like larger buildings, but we have a green building code that's being piloted right now where you actually get incentives. I think it's expedited review for including, kind of high, very sustainable practices in building. So this, it wouldn't be something that we would do with an overlay, for instance, but there may be other ways in the city to get at that. Great, Trupti?
So yeah, I want to go back to the previous point about the rooftop decks and not worrying about what we may not have covered or covered thoroughly in the work group. What I would like to see is, could we model things, especially to what Angela was discussing in terms of what is possible and not possible with the rooftop decks? Could we have some visuals for the upcoming meetings so that we can address this in a way which will be really easy for folks to understand, and also to address the question itself, whether it's possible to have a rooftop deck. Now, assuming we get to the point that says, yes, we can, if it's under a gabled hip roof, with it being 10 feet back, whatever all those requirements are, if we can model that, because I think rooftop decks are super important to a lot of folks, especially for folks looking at new construction. And if it is possible to do, I'd like to see under what circumstance it is possible, so, to the extent that we can model it and have a visual.
I just want to make sure that we don't hijack the whole meeting on this conversation. So we will have to table this one and put this on the parking lot, but this is something that the small working group can do and talk about, and that's the purpose of the small working group. So let's make sure that we readdress this and come up with some maybe ideas. We'll have to just regroup maybe before Saturday. town hall so that we do not go down this rabbit hole again, because we're not hearing from other people. We're hearing from the small working group members, and this is a listening session from the public.
There's the public.
Oh, perfect.
Public
Thank
has
you, Winnie,
spoken.
or Jack.
So I do think that another important point was brought up that we should talk about, which is on the topic of brick. And the interesting point that Matthew brought up is what qualifies as brick? Would a veneer qualify as brick? Would it just be a standalone brick rectangle? What qualifies? Would stone count? You know, what is the definition as currently proposed as to what brick is?
Yeah, and that's a good question. We don't have one. There are suggestions that we've taken. So if you know, depending on the direction that the feedback from the community goes, in terms of requiring brick, that there's going to have to be a lot of thought into what that means. There are other cities throughout the country, and also actually not even far off, or surrounding cities, that do have similar requirements in some places, and they have sort of examples of like how they describe it, or linking it up with, you know, other building standards that reference brick. So as those get updated, this would automatically update. But I think as Catherine was saying, the material that she used in the building that she's just built, it's an insulating material that looks a lot like brick, but it's a veneer, and there's some really wonderful veneers. And we wouldn't want to prevent, you know, the building technology is changing constantly, and there's some really, really interesting products that are coming out. So it's really more about what gives the feel of brick, and ideally the, you know, the kind of long lasting, the durability of it, the sustainability of it, and how we would get to that definition.
I think it's an excellent point that I'm also going to put on the follow-ups for the small group, because we did not, to my recollection, discuss the sustainability side of brick and that consideration. And I think it is something, and I appreciate Matthew bringing that up. I think it is something that should be discussed.
Yeah, it was in the original, in the documents that Catherine produced, and at conversations we've had, have touched on it a little bit, but.
So I think a way to frame that is also to think about, if we think about something like brick, what's the purpose? Is it the aesthetic, which I think, Naomi, when you were describing, you were talking about the human scale of something like brick, the way it's laid out and perceptually what it looks like, or is it the longevity? And now we're adding a kind of another aspect, which is the sustainability aspect. So which one is it? You know, which one do we care about?
It can be multiple things.
No, I agree. That's what I think we need to look at all of
whether or
them.
not they want it.
I think that we need to think through all of those in terms of why we want brick. It's not one, it's not the other. Maybe it's a combination, or why different materials would qualify, because what we're after is the aesthetic, or what we're after is
that would be
the
great feedback to get from people too. Like if brick is something that the community really desires, in what situations, you know, what is it about it that is desired, and that would help inform the definition going forward.
Naomi, so I have some questions.
Oh,
so
awesome.
When you talk to me about how did we do outreach? Did we talk about like the flyers and the mailers, and then could we talk about the need to make, we keep talking about responses, but how many responses should we get in that survey, and what's that need for?
Yes, so responses to the survey, we have, I think as of now, around 200, which is awesome.
amazing.
The way that we tend to approach, well, a good way to approach surveys and statistics is to look at what is a statistically kind of valid sample size from a population. So if we're saying that we've got, what was it, 3,259 properties that would potentially be affected by this overlay. Per statistics, if you want to make a solid decision based off of just sampling a small group of opinions, you need to get to around 350 responses. So we are doing pretty good. The more, the better. So, if we could hear from every single person, that would be amazing. We've done one round of flyering to all properties. We've also sent postcards by mail to any owner that had their home address listed differently from their property address in Sunnyside. So understanding that there are some people who don't live at the addresses that they own in Sunnyside, and we really want to make sure that we hear from them as well. So we will keep seeing how feedback comes in to the survey in terms of numbers, and we may need to do more rounds of outreach, flyering, whatever we need to get to that number in order to make a decision.
Great, thank you. So one other question I have, just for just curiosity. So if people could put in the chat, how did you hear about this meeting? Did you hear about it from the North Star? Did you hear about it from Sunnyside? Did you hear about it from the flyer that was mailed to your house? We are always curious how our outreach works and what we could do better and how we could do it better. So if you could put in the chat how you heard about this meeting, whether it was flyer, whether it was the North Star, whether it was your neighbor, we would love to hear from you, because we want to make sure that we have as much participation as possible from homeowners. So that's one question I have. And if you want to raise your hand and you want to say it, that's fine too.
Yeah, we'd be super interested to hear how you found out. It's great to see so many new faces.
So someone says they heard about it from the flyer, and they said they want to thank us for all of our thoughtful work and expertise. Heard about it via the flyer. Someone else said the flyer and the Sunnyside newsletter. And someone said, oh, the North Denver Tribune, so the North Star. So the the North Star article. Great, thank you all for answering that. And one other question that I have is process. So this is just part of the listening session. So we kind of went over those slides pretty fast. So Naomi, want to talk to them about process again? And maybe we could use the Harkness Heights as an example of how we had town halls and then we refined it, and then we had town halls and then we refined it and then we did surveys. So you could talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a circle of feedback and refinement and thinking, and I mean, obviously, as you can tell, we've got more refinement to do, but we want to make sure that we come to people at this stage, because otherwise you start going down a rabbit hole of working on something and then find out that like, man, like actually people weren't interested in this. So it's so important to like keep coming back at different phases. So I think what will happen after we're already looking at comments that have come in on the survey. The survey is really useful because it keeps everything in the same spot. So, you can easily go through and see what themes people are talking about, what concerns they have. And, many of those concerns, you want to look into them. Like the last thing that I think any of us want is for this overlay to potentially negatively affect anything. So we want to be very, very careful. The process with Harkness Heights was very careful and very deliberate. And towards, further on, we also will work very carefully, even more with the planning department, having them help vet things. And again, more with architects, continuing to do modeling and trying to imagine any scenario that would break the rules, or where our rules would prevent something that is actually good that the neighborhood wanted. And that happened in Harkness Heights, and that's the where we went back and we were like, oh man, we realized we need to add this caveat to it, or we need to think about the smaller lots in a different way, because we keep modeling on our average sized lots of 50 feet wide, but there are many that are smaller. And so how would this affect that? So that's a little bit of what the process would look like over the next months.
Great. And then, so there's this comment and there's a theme that I've heard. Chris mentioned it, and he believes that overlays make building new housing more expensive and less affordable, so for people to live in the neighborhood. And that is a theme from the YIMBY group. I will acknowledge that that's that's your truth. There are other truths out there that contradict what you say. Houses are sold on square foot value, square footage. And lots in Northwest Denver are sold on square foot value. So whether you have a porch on it or not, doesn't matter. And this is just so we can, I just want to name it. This is for redevelopment. So as houses, Amber said, she scraped her home and she rebuilt. So this is only for redevelopment. It's not for if you don't have a porch, we're not going to require you to have a porch. That's not what this overlay is. It's only for as redevelopment occurs in Sunnyside, these would be some of the standards. But I do want to name that. I do see, Jana, you have your hand up. Thank you for patiently waiting. Let's hear what you have to say.
Oh, I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you go.
Well, you asked, see, I'm an owner, but I live in Colorado Springs. I turned it's only 636 square feet into a rental over 30 years ago. And you asked how I found out about this, and someone emailed me. I mean, I don't know where it really came from, but I've had renters in there for 22 years was the first one. The current one's been in there for 12 years. And I'm kind of interested in what the standards might be, because I don't want to sell out to somebody who's going to put a square box on my property. So I would like to know, I kind of like what you're talking about as far as maintaining the feel of the neighborhood, but maybe not making it. And I was scared that you were going to make it so restrictive that my property values would drop, but it sounds like you're doing a really good job. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Super appreciate that. And I'm really glad you're here and that you found out about it. We realize with the postcard mailers that we send to property owner addresses that unless a property owner updates those when they move, the city assessor doesn't necessarily have the most current address for someone. And so
Yeah.
always trying to figure out a way around that. But yeah, and that goes for anybody here. I'm going to put my direct email in the chat, and I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations, send you more materials. We'll send out the slides from this PowerPoint too, so you can look over those, and for anybody that came a little bit later. But happy to chat on the phone, or any other way you want to continue to talk about this.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Bill just reminded me it is 7:50. So we want to give some space to actually a very related topic for Liz Weigel to speak. And I think this actually gets to some of the topics that Councilwoman was mentioning, and that's coming up in the chat of like density and zoning. So for instance, we've got this whole neighborhood planning initiative coming up, which is an opportunity to talk about things like that. There may be other projects in the city that are completely different than the neighborhood planning initiative, but if we're talking about, general vision for the future of what the neighborhood looks like, not with just housing, but with all sorts of things, the neighborhood planning initiative is starting, and that is a really important opportunity.
Naomi, an important question came forward right here at the end as you were talking, and I think it'd be good if we talk to it.
Yes, ADUs. Yeah.
Yes, that's the one.
Yep, I just saw that too, and I'm really glad you brought that up. So an overlay cannot allow ADUs, but we would be happy to talk to those portions of the neighborhood that do not currently allow them about rezoning to allow ADUs. It's work that Councilman Sandoval's office and I've been working on with a lot of neighborhoods. Most properties in Sunnyside actually allow ADUs, I think. Every single single unit home in the 2-unit districts, you can build an ADU. That's another way to get to, you know, if we're talking about density and housing more people, that's another way to get 2 units on a property. The existing house can stay, build an ADU in the back. It's a really incredible kind of wealth building tool for existing residents as well. There also are many, those C1, the one, like when I showed the map, I can dig into a little bit more, but there's many districts in the single unit parts of the neighborhood that also allow ADUs. And we just saw a map of where ADUs are being built in the city, and District 1 in general, but also Sunnyside is like #1. People are building ADUs. So if that's something you're interested in as well, happy to talk about that. It wouldn't be an overlay, it would be actual rezoning. Thank you. Liz.
Hi, everybody. I'm Liz Weigel. And thank you so much for letting me steal just a little bit of your time on this meeting. It was great to sit through and listen to this and see that there's so much leadership already in this neighborhood around important issues like this. So I wanted to I'm just going to share my screen if that's.
Oh, have we made?
Maybe I can't, but.
I think we can do that.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, as Naomi mentioned, we're just kicking off a neighborhood planning process for Sunnyside and some of your neighbors to the south and north, basically the neighborhoods of District 1 that are east of Federal. Am I sharing now? No. Okay.
I'm sorry, I have to get, I think Amanda is.
No worries. I don't really need it too much. So just wanted to kind of get the word out. We're right at the start of this process, and it's really this opportunity to think very big picture. You're very much focused on the details of one aspect tonight, but this a neighborhood planning process is the opportunity to think forward. So go look 20 years out in the future and think about what would you like your neighborhood to be? What are the things you like that you want to see preserved in the future? What are the things that need to be improved?
Now you should be able to share your screen.
And what are those big ideas, and come together as thank you, Naomi. And it's land use is one aspect of it, and we're talking about tonight. Do you see anything? No.
Yep, we can see
share
it.
That or no?
It looks good.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and so land use is one aspect of that, but we'll also be talking about transportation, about parks and open space, about housing and small businesses and the economy. And it's really kind of that opportunity to talk about everything big picture and come together on a vision. And then ultimately we create a policy document where we put strategies in place to try to achieve.
Liz, I think you've cut out. Oh no. Well, if he doesn't come back in, I can try to finish your sentences. We had a big kickoff meeting for it this week. This is going to be a 2-year process. There's multiple ways to get involved. And as Liz was saying, by the way, this is being led by the planning department. Councilman Sandoval in our office is, we are supporting them. We've got people that are on the steering committee. But if you want to get in touch with them, there's oops, she stopped screen sharing. There's that information. We can also put that in the chat. That this will be going on for a while. We'll have multiple opportunities for input. So we really hope that you get involved in that, especially if you're passionate about things such as housing affordability, density, the future of Sunnyside, and in a very large forward-thinking transportation networks, like every. Oh, she's back. Let's. All right, Liz, I subbed in for you a little bit. I think it was that good, but.
Did you hear me? I'm so sorry about that. I was on for the entire meeting and then lost it. I just jumped on my phone because I think my internet dropped. So hopefully you heard most of that we're starting on this long-term planning process. It'll be about 2 years long, and we're at the beginning of it, and we really want to get the word out and hear from everybody. just really about the like, don't like, or about in your neighborhood, things you hope for in the future. And we've got our, maybe Naomi could type it into the chat since I lost some of my slides, but we've got our website up. That's denvergov.org/near northwest plan. And we have an online survey up there. We had a virtual kickoff last night, but you can, the replay should be up there shortly, and you can go watch that. We'll actually be at the Saturday event in person. So if you'd like to come out again and come chat with us. But our website does list a number of upcoming events where we'd love to talk with people in person about it as well. But great to see so many of you interested in all these types of topics tonight. And we'd love to get you involved in the neighborhood plan and talk about kind of bigger picture, what your vision is for your neighborhood. So happy to answer any questions if there are any. And sorry about that snafu there.
Thanks, Brad did post the link to the page in the chat. People want to go to that.
Thank you, Brad.
That survey. Awesome. Any last questions from anyone? We will be having our first in-person meeting on Saturday. As we mentioned, it's at Denver, the bookbinding in Sunnyside. It's at 10 a.m. There will be coffee, and please spread the word and help people get out there. And again, I'm going to put my email in the chat right now. Naomi Grunditz at denvergov.org. And feel free to reach out directly with any questions. We've also got Sunnyside people who are also Sunnyside United Neighbors who are happy to answer questions. And other than that, I think we'll close 2 minutes early. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. This was a really good discussion and just the type of feedback and conversations we're hoping to have. So thank you so much for spending your night with us.
Naomi, could I jump in and ask everyone on this call? There are a lot of thanks. The best way you could thank us is talk to your neighbors and have them fill out the survey and voice their opinions. This is a community initiative, and for it to succeed, we need as much of the community as possible to lend us their voice. So if all of you could, as a little bit of homework, go to 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 of your neighbors and just talk to them about this important initiative and have them fill out the survey and join us at the upcoming town halls. There's yard signs out there. There's the flyers. There's signs on restaurants and coffee shops in the neighborhood. If you could just talk to your neighbors, that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, James. All right, everybody, have a good night. Thanks, you.
Naomi, great job.
Nice job, Naomi.
Thank you.
Oh, and this has been recorded and will be posted on the landing page for anyone who wants to watch.
Oh, hey, Naomi, will you put the presentation up there too? Because I thought that was really great.
The slides will be up there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.
I love it.